Alright, stop scrolling. This is the one. Go to sleep. The complete Roman Empire saga. 400 years, all in one place. I've spent over 2 years of my life crafting this series, all by myself. Over 20 hours of content, bringing you the ultimate chronicle of Rome. From the golden age of Augustus to the peak under Trajan, through the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. We'll see Diocletian's reforms, Constantine's new capital, and the final split after Theodosius. This was a massive undertaking. If you appreciate the effort, a like and subscribe means the world. No time. Hit save for later, so you don't lose it. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Roman MP. The 20-our grand collection of Roman Empire history is here. This video took 2.5 years to produce, with a script of nearly 200,000 words. It has a total duration of over 20 hours. The content covers more than 400 years of Roman Empire history, starting from the Augustan era in 27 BC, including the era of the 5 good emperors with Trajan, the 3rd century crisis where 30 emperors were changed in 50 years, Diocletian's tetrarchy, Constantine's relocation of the capital to Constantinople, until the death of Theodosius in 395 AD. The content of the latter 200 years is particularly detailed. Understand the history of the unified era of the Roman Empire in one go. I sincerely ask all viewers and friends for your likes, shares, and subscriptions. If you don't have time to watch it right now, you can save it for later. Now, let us journey together back to the Roman Empire of the classical era. In the year 305 AD, in Nicomedia, the abdication ceremony of the Roman Emperor Diocletian was being held. Galerius, the Caesar who had once guarded the Danube and defeated the Sasanian Persians, received the imperial crown under the watchful eyes of all, becoming the new Augustus. Standing beside the triumphant Galerius was another spirited young man, the 31-old Constantine. He was the son of Constantius. For years, he had closely followed in Diocletian's footsteps, his ability and achievements self-evident. He held expectations of becoming the new Caesar, but he was soon dealt a harsh blow by the reality of Galerius's decision. Constantine, having lost the qualification for Caesar, was greatly disappointed and prepared to return to his father's side. As he journeyed westward and crossed the strait, passing by the small coastal city of Byzantium, he probably never imagined that when he returned, this city would have another, more resounding name. According to Constantine's official account, he was the child of Constantius and Helena, the daughter of a British king. However, the more widely accepted identity for Helena is the daughter of a common innkeeper. After all, at that time, the region of Britain was firmly in Roman hands. Where would a British kingdom even exist? Constantine's birthplace was most likely Naissus in the region of Dacia, the very place where Gallienus had crushed the Gothic army in 167 AD. Constantine, raised in a traditional Illyrian family, was martially adept from a young age. As his father's status rose steadily, his life also improved. But who would have known that the first sword of ambition would strike his own family? To be promoted to the rank of imperial Caesar, Constantius was forced to divorce his first wife, Helena, in 289 AD and marry Maximian's daughter, Theodora. Constantine, too, had to leave his soaring father, sent to Nicomedia as a high status hostage under Diocletian's watch. Of course, staying by the emperor's side was not necessarily a bad thing. During his decades in the East, Constantine participated in matters large and small, repeatedly earning merit in wars on the Danube, in Persia, and in Egypt. He was tall and taciturn, proficient in sports and military arts, fearless in battle, and friendly to others in peacetime. Throughout his life's actions, he always maintained the enterprising spirit of a young man, yet tempered it with prudent moderation. He not only possessed vigorous energy, but also maintained a common self, minus disciplined nature, unswayed by material desires. Thus, he was widely loved and respected by the populace and the soldiers, who called him the most qualified candidate for Caesar. Diocletian highly recognized his ability and therefore entrusted him with more responsibilities. But Galerius's attitude towards him was the complete opposite. Not only did he leave him standing on the sidelines during the subsequent succession ceremony, but some rumors even suggest he tried to murder Constantine. It is said that he once deliberately arranged for him to fight a lion alone. Whether the rumors are true or not, Constantine's position was extremely sensitive, and he was viewed with suspicion by the monarch. His situation in the east was perilous. As if anticipating this, Constantius, who had just become the new Western Augustus in Milan, requested Galerius to transfer Constantine to the west. Galerius, after much thought, reluctantly agreed. Constantine dared not delay for a moment and rode off at full speed. The decision was made late at night. The next morning, Galerius regretted it and tried to intercept Constantine, but it was already too late. While the abdication ceremony was held in the east, a simultaneous ceremony took place in the Western Empire at Medium and Milan. The former Caesar, Constantius, succeeded as Augustus. Constantius's previous military achievements were outstanding, and his accession was widely acclaimed. But the subsequent appointment of the Eastern and Western Caesars seemed somewhat hasty. Galerius, the new senior Augustus, perhaps believed that a new era should bring new ideas and that the old habit of nepotism should be abandoned. Therefore, he did not consider Constantius's son, Constantine, or Maximian's son, Maxentius, as potential heirs. Yet, considering the need for stability, he reasoned that one should not avoid relatives if they are worthy. Thus, he first appointed his own nephew, Maximinus Daia, as the Eastern Caesar. As for the choice of the Western Caesar, he did not consult Maximian or Constantius at all, but directly appointed his own subordinate, Severus II, to the post. In his vision of the future, by controlling 3/4 of the empire, he would be as decisive as his old leader Diocletian. The plan was perfect, but neither he nor the two new Caesars had the ability to support this ancient empire, which was plagued by technical ailments and would be severely weakened by even a minor cold. His end, therefore, was not far off. Faced with Galerius's direct appointment of the Western Caesar, the broad-minded Constantius chose to compromise. He once again prepared to go to Britain to strike at the local Caledonian nascent Picts. Constantine, having successfully returned from the east, traveled through the vast lands of Pannonia, Italy, and Gaul, finally arriving at the port of Bologna to reunite with the father he had not seen for over a decade. They boarded a ship together and left the port of Bologna. 10 years earlier, it was from here that Constantius had set out on his campaign of restoration, bringing the Diocese of Roman Britain back into the fold. And now, this land would, by a turn of fate, become his burial place. The war against the British barbarians was, of course, of little suspense. Constantius's purpose was self-evident to integrate his son with the army. In several months of fighting, Constantine got along very well with the middle-ranking officers. His talent and leadership were fully demonstrated to everyone. However, Constantius's health could no longer hold up. In 306 AD, again at the beginning of a century, just like Severus at the beginning of the previous century, Constantius died in the region of modern Day, York at the age of 56. Before his death, he designated Constantine as his successor. Faced with the old emperor's last will and the new emperor's outstanding talent, and with Constantius's other sons being too young for the battle, hardened soldiers, Accepting the leadership of their old commander's son was always better than a stranger from the east. Constantine, under the acclamation of the troops, after a feigned refusal, ascended the throne, and he was directly proclaimed as the senior emperor, the Augustus of the West. After his accession, Constantine immediately allied with an alien Nick, king, and sent a letter to Galerius in the east. In the letter, he wrote with a sincere tone, "My beloved father, Constantius, died in York from his tireless work day and night. I have a legitimate right to succeed him and was compelled by the army, as there was truly no other way. I had to reluctantly assume the office of the new Augustus of the West. This is truly regrettable." Galerius, although not comparable to his old leader in political skill, could understand what the reality was. He was surprised and angry. Constantine's succession had been done without consulting him at all, but after calm consideration, Galerius was not certain of victory. Constantine had in his hands the field army that had followed his father for many years, and their combat effectiveness was extremely fierce. If war broke out, the outcome was uncertain. Galerius therefore reluctantly recognized the succession, but he promoted Severus I to Augustus and only recognized Constantine as the Western Caesar. Constantine, also showing great perspective, took a step back. The two sides reached a compromise. The tetrarchy system continued to operate. Galerius could reluctantly accept Constantine's succession, but the next person to appear on the stage was someone he could absolutely not tolerate. The city of Rome in Italy, the center of the Roman state for over 1,000 years, had become increasingly marginalized in recent decades. The citizens of Rome could not accept this huge gap in status, and resentment gradually accumulated. In addition, Italy's tax exemption had been revoked. The Senate and the Praetorian Guard in Rome had been dealt a devastating blow by Diocletian. The old forces, unwilling to fade away, found common cause. Moreover, the most suitable leader for a rebellion was not far away. The 28-year-old Maxentius was the son of Maximian and had married Galerius's daughter. He was an important candidate for the position of Caesar, but was snubbed by Galerius under the pretext of choosing the worthy. The problem was, Galerius's choice, Severus I, showed no particular worthiness either. Maxentius, of noble birth but now reduced to growing vegetables in his own villa, became angrier the more he thought about it. He pulled in his equally angry old father to plot a rebellion together. Maximian had chosen to retire before, but now it seemed he must have been very reluctant at the time. If not for Diocletian's coercion and inducement, who would be willing to give up such a high position? Maximian must have really wanted to ask Diocletian, at this time, why give up being a perfectly good emperor to hold a succession. The father and son came to a conclusion. The main contradiction in Rome today was the growing demand for emperorship and the limited number of thrones. When two angry people get together, the situation is bound to get out of control. In October 306, Maxentius led the Praetorian Guard in a revolt. He easily took control of the area around Rome, killed the city prefect and a few officials loyal to Galerius, and then had himself crowned emperor. Severus I, hearing that the capital was lost, tried to stabilize the situation. He led his army towards Rome, but found that the situation was completely out of control. The towns of Italy defected to Maxentius one after another. Severus's army was also wavering, with soldiers constantly deserting. Seeing this, Severus had to retreat to Ravenna and chose to defend the fortified city, while at the same time asking Galerius for help, waiting for reinforcements with the belief that if he held on, there would be a way. But when the garrison of Ravenna saw that the commander of the besieging army was their old leader, Maximian, their psychological defense completely collapsed. Ravenna was taken from within. Severus I, I was defeated and captured, and was executed shortly after. In Rome, an Augustus of the empire had faced open rebellion and was even directly executed. This was tantamount to throwing Galerius's face in the dirt. Galerius, whose blood pressure was already soaring, was unwilling to entrust the task of suppressing the rebellion to Constantine, and Constantine and Maxentius had likely reached some kind of cooperation agreement, so he decided to take the field himself. In 307 AD, Galerius led the powerful veteran soldiers of the Danube front into Italy. Maxentius did not dare to fight and chose a scorched-minus-earth policy, defending the city of Rome. Galerius was invincible in northern Italy and soon advanced to the banks of the Tiber. But whether it was because the walls built by Aurelian were too strong, or because his field army was not good at siege warfare, Galerius fought bitterly for several months but could not break the city. He was at his wits' end. His army, under Maximian's monetary offensive, was on the verge of mutiny. He was forced to withdraw his troops north to a more favorable position. On the retreat, Galerius's troops burned and plundered, leaving a trail of scorched earth. Maxentius's army only dared to follow and send them off, conducting a panicked pursuit. Constantine's large army on the border also continued to watch the situation, making no move. Galerius's special military operation in Italy could be described as starting with a tiger's roar, but ending with a snake's tail, having a beginning but no end. One punch failed to open the way, and 100 more followed. His prestige and control were greatly diminished. Severus I was defeated and killed. Galerius could not possibly recognize Maxentius's status, so he appointed his trusted assistant, Licinius, as the Western Augustus, temporarily stationing him in Dalmatia. After completing this move, Galerius thought of seeking help from his old leader. So in 308 AD, Galerius held a conference at Carnuntum. Several emperors and the former emperor Diocletian were all present. At the beginning of the meeting, Maximian took the lead in requesting Diocletian to come out of retirement and clean up the mess in the empire. But he was met with a firm refusal from Diocletian, who uttered his famous words, "If you could see the cabbages I am growing with my own hands at Salone, you would not ask me to sacrifice this for the pursuit of power." The result of the conference was that Constantine was recognized as the Western Caesar, and Licinius took over as the Western Augustus. Maxentius's legitimacy was not recognized, but he still actually controlled Italy and North Africa. All parties recognized the current status quo. If you add the self-proclaimed ruler in North Africa, Domitius Alexander, and the retired Maximian and Diocletian, the Roman Empire at this time had a total of 8 emperors existing simultaneously. It was truly a rare situation. This was in 308 AD, which was precisely the climax of the War of the 8 Princes in the East. The histories of the East and West once again magically corresponded. Diocletian's arbitration temporarily stabilized the situation for all parties. The tetrarchy system of the Roman Empire, in just 3 years, was already so faltering. Could Diocletian's guiding spirit still be upheld? Would Maxentius, who had not received a title, and Maximinus, whose status had not changed, choose to swallow this insult? Let us find out next time. Just 3 years after Diocletian's abdication, chaos once again erupted across the Roman Empire. To maintain the stability of the empire and the operation of the tetrarchy system, in 308 AD, several supreme rulers of the Roman Empire held a summit at Carnuntum on the Danube frontier. All parties had frank exchanges and fully exchanged views. Maximian, facing his old big brother Diocletian, achieved nothing. Not only did he give up on his own comeback, but he also accepted the fact that his son Maxentius would have no claim to the throne. The final result of this meeting was mutual compromise. All parties maintained the current status quo. Galerius and Lichenius served as the eastern and western Augusti respectively. Maximinus and Constantine served as the eastern and western Caesars. Maxentius remained unrecognized. After mediation, the empire finally returned to peace. But this peace was entirely maintained by the lingering prestige of Diocletian. The fundamental contradictions were not resolved and could not last long. Moreover, someone was already feeling dissatisfied and restless. In 309 AD, in North Africa, Maxentius, who had been fighting the rebels for a whole year, finally suppressed the rebellion. He crossed the Mediterranean and returned to Rome. Not only was he not invited to the previous year's conference, but the final result was also extremely unfavorable to him. Maxentius, without being present at the meeting, was directly stripped of his imperial title. You must know that among the attendees, one was his own father, and another was his father minus in minus law. This situation of being disliked by everyone made him often complain that Maximian was too weak and feel indignant. Maximian was targeted everywhere in the meeting. Neither his own nor his son's throne was preserved, and they still controlled a quarter of the empire. Those who abandon me, yesterday's day cannot be kept. This pair of high minus blood minus pressure father and son were about to begin their high minus blood minus pressure operations. Not only in the west, but Maximinus in the east also felt dissatisfied. In terms of seniority, he had been the Eastern Caesar for several years. In terms of relationship, he was Galerius's good nephew. But Lichenius was directly parachuted into the position of Western Augustus. Wasn't this a bit like a designated appointment? Maximinus felt he had been treated unfairly and held a grudge. The empire, in substance, had formed a situation of 6 emperors, co-minus ruling. In the west, Constantine and Maxentius accepted Maximian's guidance. In the east, Lichenius and Maximinus were united under Galerius's banner. In geometry, a triangle has a stable structure, but such a law clearly does not apply in power struggles. The era of chaotic warfare in the empire was about to begin. The chaos began again with Maximian's greed. In 310 AD, because his relationship with his son in Rome was too tense, Maximian, finding it difficult to stay, chose to go to his son minus in minus law Constantine's place. Constantine and Empress Fausta treated him with all due respect. Faced with this situation, Maximian once again could not restrain his desires and was determined to perform a hat minus trick and take back everything that once belonged to him. In 310, the Franks in the north again invaded the Rhine frontier. Constantine immediately led some elite legions north, leaving the rest of his army and supplies in the southern Gaul region. Maximian seized the opportunity, spreading rumors in southern Gaul that their great emperor Constantine had unfortunately died on the front line. Maximian successfully occupied the cities of southern Gaul and sent a message to Rome, inviting Maxentius to come to Gaul to join his grand cause. His abacus beads were clattering loudly, but Maximian unclearly underestimated Constantine. Upon learning of the change in the rear, Constantine quickly led his army by land and water, rushing hundreds of miles to the gates of Arles. The enemy came too quickly, completely unexpectedly. Maximian was greatly alarmed and quickly retreated to the city of Marseille. But Constantine followed closely and surrounded the city. The city's garrison had no reason to resist. Constantine then chose to offer up Maximian and surrender. Maximian fell into the hands of his own son minus in minus law. Faced with his dear father minus in minus law, Constantine decided to send him to reunite with his own father, who was also Maximian's other son minus in minus law. In 310, the original Western Augustus, Diocletian's close comrade, thus ended his hard minus to minus described life. If he had listened to Diocletian's advice, he would not have come to such a laughable end. Maximian exited the stage of history. Galerius in the east had also reached his final moments. Since the failure of the campaign against Italy and the end of the Conference of Carnuntum, this emperor, who had once been active on the Danube front, commanded the Persian War, and was full of vigor, had become decadent and listless, living a life of debauchery. Of course, he also presided over some public works projects in the east, reclaiming wasteland in Pannonia and building water conservancy projects. But overall, he had lost his former enterprising spirit. The last stage of Galerius's life was accompanied by a serious illness, probably a cancer of the penis. This cruel and inhumane terminal illness tortured him for a whole year. In 311 AD, Galerius died painfully in his palace in Nicomedia at the age of 51. As soon as Galerius died, the two Eastern emperors tacitly divided his sphere of rule. Maximinus took Asia Minor, and Licinius got the Thrace region. The Eastern Augustus position was now held by Licinius, and the vacant Western Augustus position was not filled. Maxentius was still in the awkward situation of being unrecognized. The successive deaths of Maximian and Galerius represented the gradual demise of the historical authority left by the first tetrarch. Although Diocletian still lived in his palace at Salone, his successors were completely unrestrained and no longer cared about his opinions. The first conflict to break out was between Constantine and Maxentius in the west. Constantine's rule over Gaul and Britain continued his father's lenient and merciful policies. He also did not hesitate to expel invading barbarians, especially when compared with other emperors. In an era of chaotic warfare, living in Constantine's lands, you could count yourself lucky. In contrast, Maxentius lacked legitimate title from the beginning, had killed excessively while suppressing the rebellion in North Africa, and had gradually become estranged from the Senate and the Praetorian Guard who had supported his rise. In this situation, the balance of power shifted. Constantine gradually gained the upper hand. It was also during this period that Constantine reached a secret alliance with Licinius in the east. He married his half-minor sister, Constantia, to Licinius. The two sides reached an on-minus aggression pact, tacitly allowing each other to unify their respective halves of the empire. Maxentius and Maximinus in the east also reached an agreement. The empire presented a -on-minus situation. Constantine was hesitant to send troops. His rear was constantly threatened by German invasions. Licinius would at best remain neutral and would not provide him with direct help. Therefore, he was in a dilemma. But Maxentius helped him out. He broke the stalemate with a lightning military move and launched a special military operation. At the end of 311 AD, Maxentius, under the banner of avenging his father Maximian, led his army across the Alps into Gaul. To get the support of the Praetorian Guard, he greatly expanded their numbers and also added people from various North African ethnic groups to the army. At this time, the number of troops had far exceeded the upper limit. The people of Italy were suffering terribly. Maxentius was full of confidence. The troop ratio between him and Constantine was 200,000 to 100,000. The advantage was his. However, the Italian region was far from the front-line army, and its combat effectiveness could not be compared with the battle-hardened Rhine legions. Constantine, for the second time, went straight for the mouth of the Rhone. Maxentius's supply lines could not be extended. He was forced to abandon the occupied areas of Gaul and retreat to the more favorable Alpine front. In 312 AD, Constantine led an expeditionary force of 40,000 to launch a strategic counter-offensive against Italy. His army cleverly crossed the natural barrier of the Alps and entered the Po Valley like a divine army. Maxentius hurriedly sent troops to block them, but encountered wind and rain on the way, and the reinforcements were blocked. Constantine was able to quickly capture the Alpine fortress city of Susa. The plains of Italy were thus open before them. Maxentius's general led a large army, with heavy cavalry as the main force, to block Constantine at Turin. Constantine, learning from Aurelian's tactics, chose to extend the charging distance of the enemy's heavy cavalry and set up obstacles to slow down the charge's power, then launched a counterattack. The Italian legion suffered a crushing defeat. Constantine then captured Turin and advanced east to the royal palace in Milan. To clear the flank threat to Rome, Constantine continued to advance east, defeating the Verona garrison commander Ruthlessly Pompeianus at Brescia. He then quickly surrounded Verona. The fortress of Verona was surrounded by water on three sides and was easy to defend but hard to attack. Constantine sent troops to cross the river at a weak point, completely surrounding the city. Pompeianus, seeing this, chose to break out alone to recruit troops in the east and fight back, intending to form a pincer attack on Constantine with the city's garrison. Constantine, facing the arrival of a strong enemy, chose to fill the second line of the battle formation into the first line and, once again, lead from the front. He finally crushed the enemy army. Pompeianus was killed on the spot. The Verona garrison, seeing this, chose to surrender. The cities of northern Italy fell into Constantine's hands. Maxentius continued his usual life in Rome. The front-line reports he received were mostly embellished and ambiguous. But reports can be deceiving. Battle lines do not lie. As Constantine's army gradually approached Rome, Maxentius was forced to lead his army out to fight. He united with the dying Senator, the Praetorian Guard, for a desperate struggle. He gathered a legion larger than the one in northern Italy and led them to block Constantine at the Milvian Bridge, north of Rome. This was the last place on the road to Rome that could stop the enemy. Maxentius dismantled the Milvian Bridge and replaced it with a pontoon bridge. Maxentius tried to use this to boost morale and achieve a -die effect. The two sides fought a decisive battle near the Milvian Bridge on the Tiber River. Maxentius's army was mainly composed of the royal heavy cavalry, the Praetorian Guard, and local troops recruited from his suppression of the rebellion in North Africa. Constantine's troops were mainly the battle-hardened Gallic legions and barbarian auxiliary troops from Germania and Britain. The strength of the two sides was roughly equal, and both deployed their cavalry on the flanks. The battle was initiated by Constantine himself. He personally led the cavalry on both wings to charge Maxentius's forces. The monarchs leading from the front boosted his troops' morale. Maxentius's heavy cavalry, facing the attack of light cavalry, appeared clumsy and was quickly defeated, fleeing in disarray to the rear. Maxentius was in the second line with the new recruits. His soldiers, seeing this, immediately lost confidence, and the formation began to disintegrate on its own. Maxentius himself could not turn the tide and was swept back with the retreat. Only the veteran Praetorian Guard in the front line chose to fight to the death. They had no way out. They engaged in a brutal melee with Constantine's army, which was attacking from all sides. In the end, they were outnumbered and almost completely annihilated. Maxentius's defeated army stepped onto the pontoon bridge, but the bridge, due to the excessive number of people, exceeded its load-bearing capacity and broke directly. Maxentius thus fell into the river. His body was not found until the next day. Constantine achieved a complete victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Before this battle broke out, there are historical records of Constantine being encouraged by a Christian miracle. It is believed that it was the appearance of the Christian deity that encouraged Constantine's morale and enabled him to win the final victory. This laid the emotional foundation for Constantine's conversion to Christianity. Of course, such records have appeared too many times in Christian history and clearly have elements of later embellishment. Everyone needs to carefully discern. In 312 AD, Constantine defeated Maxentius and formally unified the entire western part of the empire, and Lichanes, who had been watching the whole battle from the east, seemed to have been inspired and also began to look towards Maximinus in the east. The chaotic situation of the empire was not over. The war was still going on. In 312 AD, Constantine decisively defeated Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge near Rome. The latter drowned in the battle. Constantine became the sole emperor of the Western Roman Empire. The work of stabilizing the hearts of the people in the newly conquered areas and rebuilding the destroyed cities took time. Constantine therefore invited his eastern ally, Lichanes, to meet in the northern Italian stronghold of Mediolminamo on to implement their marriage alliance and partnership. At this meeting, Constantine and Lichanes emphasized that their all-minus whether strategic partnership should be fulfilled on the basis of mutual exchange and trust. Lichanes congratulated Constantine on his victory in Rome. Constantine also condemned the stubborn resistance of Maximinus in the east. The meeting was held in a harmonious atmosphere, and the most important thing was a joint imperial document issued by the two of them, the Edict of Milan. Since the Roman Empire fell into chaos and crisis, the power of Christianity within the empire had been constantly expanding. The number of believers continued to increase. By 313 AD, before the Edict of Milan was issued, it had already become a significant force in the empire. The rulers of the empire keenly discovered that the consistency in Christian education was a huge weapon for ruling the minds of the lower classes and could be completely used for their own purposes. Therefore, just a few years earlier, perhaps for the purpose of ruling or praying for his own health, Galerius had issued a decree favorable to Christianity, and a few years later in Milan, Constantine and Lichanes also reached a consensus, believing that the toxicity of Christianity was much milder than in the early days of the empire, and decided to further relax the control over Christians. The Edict of Milan was thus born. The main content of the Edict of Milan included two parts. One was to allow the people of the country to freely believe in Christianity, and the other was to stop the policy of restricting the development of Christianity and to return the confiscated church property, and also to recognize the legal status of Christianity. The following is the specific content of the edict. Although for the unity and security of the empire, many major issues have kept us increasingly busy, we still never forget to correct errors in all aspects, so that everything can be restored to the ancient Roman system and the public order of Rome can be revived. We also particularly hope that those deceived Christians who have abandoned the religion and rituals established by their ancestors, arrogantly despise all ancient practices, create some absurd laws and strange theories out of their own wild imagination, and form their own societies in different provinces of our empire, will return to the path of reason and nature. Our previously issued edicts, intended to urge everyone to worship the gods, have put many Christians in danger and suffering. Many of them have lost their lives, and many more, because they still persist in their foolish practice of their impious religion, have not been able to participate in any normal public religious activities to this day. For this reason, in line with our consistent principle of leniency, we have decided to show special grace to those unfortunate people. From now on, we will allow them to freely express their respective ideas, as long as they never forget to show proper respect for the published laws and the government. They can assemble in their respective meeting places without fear and without any interference. We will soon have another edict to inform the courts, judges, and local administrative officials of our intentions. We hope that our tolerance will make the Christians, when they pray before the God they worship, not forget our safety and prosperity, and pray for themselves and for the Republic. The promulgation of the Edict of Mal marked the almost complete abolition of the 300-year old control policy of the Roman Empire to suppress the spread of Christianity. The restrictive measures against it were completely lifted. Christians from then on spread rapidly throughout the empire, whether in cities or villages, upper or lower classes. The rise of Christianity could no longer be stopped. We will talk about the specific content of Christianity separately later. Let us first return to the year 313 AD, when the Edict of Milan was promulgated. The direct result of the meeting was still the consolidation of the alliance between Constantine and Lichines. The one who was most afraid of this result was naturally Maximinus, who was in the Far East and had become a loner. In 313, Maximinus decided to take the initiative. He set out from Bithynia, led his army across the Hellespont, and went straight for the Thrace region. The straight stronghold of Byzantium surrendered in just over 10 days under the condition of no food inside and no reinforcements outside. The coast of Thrace was in the hands of Maximinus. Lichines, in Milan, learned of the change in the east, quickly returned to his base, gathered his army, and marched east to the Thrace region, stationing his troops not far from Maximinus's camp. Lichines was also a skilled military commander. He led the Danube legions and took the initiative to attack Maximinus. The two sides fought at Heraclea, although Lichines' troops were smaller in number. With their own fighting will and the bravery of the veterans, they stubbornly broke the enemy army. The Danube legions, as famous as the Rhine legions, once again showed their divine courage. Maximinus's army collapsed like a mountain. He fled at an incredible speed, barely escaping with his life. He soon fled back to his capital, Nicomedia. Although his army was almost completely wiped out on the front line, the vast eastern lands were still in his hands. He still had the strength to fight, but perhaps the escape was too perilous. Maximinus completely gave up. He did not resist the gradually approaching front line. Lichines led his army across the Hellespont and approached Nicomedia. Maximinus then fled to Tarsus and soon died of grief and anger. Lichines naturally took control of the eastern region and became the sole emperor of the eastern part of the empire. The two emperors of the east and west defeated their competitors one after another within a year and divided the empire between them. But the perspective Lichines showed when dealing with the old subordinates of his enemies was vastly different from Constantine's. Constantine only executed the tyrant's two sons. The entire rebel party, after careful screening, only had a few leaders killed to appease the people. When a trend of denunciation broke out, Constantine chose to punish the leading accusers to stop this trend that was not conducive to unity. But Lichines' method of handling was very arbitrary and cruel. He not only executed Maximinus's children, but also eradicated all the descendants of Galerius and Severus II. What was more fatal was that he should not have, under any circumstances, laid hands on Diocletian's wife and daughter. Diocletian's daughter, Valeria, was a dutiful wife. Not only did she serve her husband Galerius diligently, but she also adopted her husband's illegitimate son and treated him like her own. With the kindness of a biological mother, she was very concerned about his life. After Galerius's death, the lustful Maximin coveted Valeria's beauty and wealth, but was rejected by Valeria. Maximinus, whose love turned to hate, then fabricated charges and brought Valeria to court, slandering her reputation and destroying her peaceful life. After being falsely accused of adultery, her property was confiscated. Afterwards, her eunuchs and servants were subjected to the most inhumane torture. Several innocent and respected noble women were killed for speaking out for her out of friendship. The empress herself and her mother, Prisca, were sentenced to exile, driven from one city to another. They were imprisoned in a remote village in the Syrian desert and subjected to endless humiliation. Diocletian, facing this situation, repeatedly begged Maximinus to show mercy. But obviously no one paid attention to this former emperor who had long lost his power. In 313, after Maximinus's downfall, the two empresses escaped from prison and wandered in hiding throughout the empire, but were eventually discovered in Thessaloniki. Lichenes showed no mercy. He immediately had them executed and thrown into the vast sea. No one understood why Lichenes was so heartless. Without Diocletian's promotion, how could he have the wealth and honor of today? In any case, Diocletian's wife and daughter ultimately met a tragic end, and Diocletian's life had also come to an end. In 313 AD, Diocletian died in his palace at Salona in Dalmatia. We do not know if he received the news of his wife and daughter's death before he died. We also have no way of knowing if he regretted giving up power. We only know that his great feats are past his time and is worthy of admiration even today. As for Diocletian's life, let everyone judge his rights and wrongs. Here, I will end with a conversation between Diocletian and a friend after his abdication, to bid farewell to this mysterious Roman emperor. How many times have 4 or 5 ministers, for their own interests, willingly abandoned their mutual grudges and united to deceive their sovereign? The emperor has a lofty position, but is isolated from his subjects and cannot know the truth of matters. What he can see is limited, and he can only listen to their distorted reports. As a result, he entrusts the most important positions to sinful and incompetent mediocrities and dismisses the most virtuous and capable of his subjects. These base and shameless tricks are impossible to guard against. Even the wisest emperor will be betrayed by his courtiers and be ruined. The most difficult thing for mankind to master is the art of governance. In 313 AD, Lichenes defeated Maximinus and became the sole emperor of the eastern part of the empire. In the same year, Diocletian, who had single-handedly created the tetrarchy system, died quietly in Salona at the age of 68. After the war in the east ended, Lichenes finally married Constantine's sister, Constantia. The two emperors were truly close and cooperated sincerely. Lichenes soon made his son, Lichenes II, Caesar. Constantine also appointed his brother Minus in Minus Law, Bassianus, as the Western Caesar. On the surface, Diocletian's tetrarchy system was once again operating as standard. Of course, everyone understood that power would only be in the hands of these two senior monarchs of the East and West. With the common enemy gone, the alliance between the East and West was already very fragile. It only needed a spark to restart the war. And what Constantine did not expect was that this spark would be Constantine's little helper, Bassianus. Constantine appointed Bassianus as Caesar to inspire his loyalty, but this to a certain extent had the opposite effect. According to the Diocletian system, a Caesar should independently rule a region, or at least have the right to exercise his skills in a certain field. But Constantine would not allow his power to be infringed upon. Bassianus therefore felt quite unbalanced, also because of the Diocletian system. The appointment of the Western Caesar needed the approval and recognition of the Eastern Augustus, who was now Lichenes. Lichenes used this power to get close to Bassianus, constantly sowing discord between him and Constantine, persuading him that he should seek another path. Bassianus's rebellious activities were detected by Constantine. He immediately ordered the arrest of Bassianus and the punishment of the rebellious party. But Bassianus had already fled to Lichenes's court ahead of time. Constantine's request to extradite the criminal was also flatly refused. Soon, the incident of Constantine's statues being torn down occurred on the border of the eastern and western controlled areas. The situation in the empire suddenly escalated. The outbreak of war was only a matter of time. In 315 AD, Constantine, on the grounds that Lichenes was harboring a criminal, led the elite Gallic legions to launch a special military operation against Illyria. The first civil war between Constantine and Lichenes officially began. The first battle took place near Seba Lae. This was a city in Pannonia on the Sava River, about 50 miles above Sirmium. Constantine led an elite force of only about 20,000 men, advancing lightly and quickly. Lichenes was caught off guard and hastily met the battle. However, he still had about 35,000 troops on hand, almost twice as many as Constantine. The side with the numerical advantage launched the attack first, but Constantine held the advantage of the terrain firmly. He led his army to hold a half-mile-long pass. This pass was flanked by continuous hills on one side and an impassable swamp on the other. This prevented Lichenes' troops from deploying, and the advantage of his cavalry could not be fully utilized. Unable to make progress, Lichenes withdrew his troops back to camp. Then it was Constantine's turn to take the initiative. The two sides lined up on the plain and faced off. First, there was a long range attack, and then they entered close combat. The battle was fierce, and the sound of killing filled the air. When the battle was at a stalemate, Constantine once again used his killer move, personally leading the cavalry group to charge. Constantine's right wing instantly crushed Lichenes' left wing. The entire battle formation began to collapse. Lichenes, who came from the Illyrian military group, was also a very capable military commander. He organized the remaining troops for a successful retreat, thus avoiding the annihilation of the entire army. But Lichenes still lost more than half of his army in this battle, about 20,000 men. After this battle, Lichenes lost the capital to confront Constantine in Illyria. So he took his wife, children, and while stranded in Sirmium, destroyed the bridges on the rivers along the way, and retreated to the Thrace region. Constantine followed closely, occupying Pannonia, Macedonia, and Greece. Lichenes recruited an army in Dacia and Thrace. Together with the remnants that had retreated from the front line, he redeployed his defense line. He entrusted his army and supplies to a general named Valens, appointed him as Caesar to resist Constantine's western campaign, and he himself fled in panic from Europe to the rear of Asia Minor. Constantine followed closely. The two sides fought on the Mardian plain in Thrace. The intensity of this battle was not as great as the previous one. The two sides lined up and began to fight. The two sides, with similar strength, once again fought to a draw. Constantine, with his outstanding command ability, led a 5,000 strong elite force to successfully capture a nearby high ground, then circled to the rear of Lichenes' army and launched an attack. Lichenes' army, facing a 2- front battle, gradually could not hold on. But the Illyrian legions also showed amazing perseverance. Although the casualties were heavy, Constantine still could not break the enemy's battle formation. Night fell. Lichenes' remnants once again successfully withdrew from the battlefield. Constantine had won 2 major battles, but he had not achieved a decisive victory. Lichenes, entrenched in the east, still occupied the recruiting grounds of Asia Minor, Egypt and Syria, and still had the strength to fight. In the end, it was Lichenes who provided Constantine with a way out. He humbly sent an envoy to sue for peace, expressing his willingness to apologize for his previous conspiracy against Constantine. At the same time, he very tactfully stated that the outcome of the war was still uncertain, and an unavoidable disaster would cause a lose-lose situation. He hoped that Constantine could exercise restraint to maintain peace and stability on both sides of the Hellespont. Perhaps it was because of Constantius' mediation, Constantine accepted Lichenes' peace talks. The two sides restored peace, but Lichines paid a high price for peace. He would cede all his European territories except for Thrace, and Valens became a political sacrifice. Not only did he stay in the position of Caesar for only a few days, but he also paid for it with his life. Regardless of whether Constantine's purpose was to maintain peace or the objective constraint of being unable to achieve a quick victory for a while, the 8 years from 315 to 323 became a rare period of peace. Since Diocletian's abdication in 305 and Constantius's death in 306, for a full 9 years, the emperors of the Roman Empire rose and fell one after another, and civil wars were constant. The chaos was even comparable to that of the 3rd century crisis, and the people of the empire finally got a chance to breathe. Constantine's rule in the West became increasingly stable. In these 8 years, Constantine mainly focused his energy on the war against the northern barbarians. The successful peace talks in 315 were also partly due to the Sarmatian invasion of the Moesia region. Constantine sent his eldest son, Crispus, to garrison the Rhine front in Gaul, while he himself personally oversaw the Danube. After several years of fierce fighting, Constantine finally gained the upper hand, with difficulty repelling one invasion after another. He also led his army to repair the bridge over the Danube, once again extending the empire's influence north of the Danube to the former province of Dacia. Constantine achieved great military success along the Danube. The civil and administrative reforms he carried out in the western part of the empire were also effective. As early as 312, after Constantine defeated Maxentius, he began a thorough liquidation of the Praetorian Guard and the Senate. Unlike Diocletian's policy of weakening the Praetorian Guard from all angles, Constantine took one step and directly abolished the Praetorian Guard. Their heavily fortified camp was also demolished. The few Praetorian officers and soldiers who were lucky enough to escape death were dispersed to the legions on the imperial frontier, sent far away, and could no longer cause harm to the empire. Of course, such a measure also had a negative consequence. The imperial capital, from then on, lost a powerful fighting force and would completely lose its ability to defend itself in the future. As for the Senate, Constantine not only further restricted their powers, but even began to directly tax the senators, making the best use of everything. The old gentlemen of the Senate from then on not only could not make money, but also had to pay the emperor. Their influence on the empire was also negligible. Constantine's most important measure during the 8 years of peace was the reform of the empire's legal system. The content of the reform was extensive, and the adjustment of the legal articles was extremely trivial. Here, only the 2 most important ones are described. First, the act of abandoning and killing infants was common in ancient times. Later, it became prevalent in various provinces, especially in Italy. This was directly related to the hardship of the people's lives, mainly caused by the unbearable heavy taxes and the cruel persecution of tax-minus delinquent families by tax officials. The impoverished people did not see a large family as a blessing. Instead, they believed that they should not let their children face unbearable suffering. This was the only feasible way for parents, perhaps because there were too many such desperate situations at that time. Constantine, out of humanitarian concern, ordered the administrative officials everywhere that as long as parents brought their children to see them unproved that they were too poor to make a living, they should immediately be given sufficient subsidies. But his regulations were too lenient, and the articles were extremely vague, making it impossible to implement them universally for a long time. And how could those well-fed officials have any pity for the lower-class people and give them real help? However, this law still reflected the suffering of the Roman people and, to a certain extent, reflected Constantine's ideal of governance. The second was Constantine's law on dealing with rape. A convicted rapist would be sentenced to death, and a simple execution was not enough to punish his crime. These people were either burned alive or torn to pieces by wild beasts in the arena. If any virgin came forward to testify that she was willing to go with him, not only could she not save her lover, but she would also lose her own life. The responsibility for this public punishment was given to the guilty party or the parents of the victimized woman. Because this crime was a public prosecution crime, a complaint could also be filed against a foreigner from another place. The prosecution was not limited by the time and place of the crime. The sentence could be extended to the innocent descendants born of this abnormal marriage. But what was criticized about this law was that the emperor made the law extremely severe and cruel, but was lenient in its execution. This undoubtedly greatly undermined the authority of the law. In 323 AD, the Western Empire under Constantine's rule was thriving, a scene of vibrant life and everything flourishing. In contrast, Lichenes in the East, who had entered his old age, had long lost his former sharpness. He could only stay in his palace in Nicomedia every day, enjoying life and debauchery. The eastern lands under his rule were in a state of turmoil. Constantine controlled the two powerful legions of the Rhine and the Danube. His military strength far exceeded Lichenes's. In this situation, the final decisive battle between the two emperors of the East and West was about to arrive. In 324 AD, the Western Roman Emperor led a large army and was stopped before a fortified city. He used all his skills, but could not take the city before him in a short time. The Eastern Emperor Lichenes turtled within the city walls. This city guarded the strait between the continents. The city could receive a steady stream of reinforcements by sea. The besiegers' supply pressure was even greater than the defenders. Constantine looked at the city before him. If he could one day avenge his grievances, blood would stain the Golden Horn. This city was about to have an intricate connection with him. Its current name was Byzantium, and in the future, people would be more familiar with its other name, Constantinople. In 323 AD, the two emperors of the East and West of the Roman Empire had already experienced 8 years of peace. In these 8 years, Constantine constantly defeated the northern barbarians, implemented legal reforms in the western part of the empire, restarted economic construction, and repaired the cities destroyed in the war. But Lichenes in the east was already old and frail. The Eastern Empire under his brilliant leadership was like Wang Zhao's new year, getting worse year by year. Faced with this situation of one side growing and the other declining, in 322, the treaty Constantine signed with the northern Gothic tribes further removed his worries about his rear. So, with Constantine's order, in 324, the Second Civil War between the two emperors of the East and West, and also the final decisive battle, began. In the year the war broke out, Constantine was 49 years old. Lichenes was already over 60th. They no longer needed to find any reason to start a war, but directly aimed for the supreme power of the empire. Lichenes was not a man of undeserved reputation. He immediately recruited troops from the east and deployed them on the plain of Hadrianopolis. His fleet patrolled the Hellespont. Lichenes's entire army had 150,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry, mainly from Cappadocia and Phrygia. Lichenes's fleet consisted of 350 triremes from the ports of Egypt, the Ionian coast, and Phoenicia. His naval power was far superior to Constantine's. Constantine's army gathered at Thessaloniki. His entire army had 120,000 infantry and cavalry. Although the total number was slightly inferior, it included the two most formidable field armies of the Roman Empire, the Rhine legions and the Danube legions. In the 8 years of peace, These field armies had been constantly tempered in battles with the northern barbarians. Their combat experience was not something Lichanes's peace-minus accustomed eastern legions could match. However, Constantine's naval power was rather shabby. In every aspect, it was inferior to Lichanes's. His fleet consisted of about 200 smaller ships, and their combat effectiveness was quite weak. Clearly, Lichanes held the naval advantage, but he did not choose to use his control of the sea to conduct long-distance landing operations. Instead, he remained stationary near Hadrianopolis, building fortifications, waiting at his ease for Constantine's army to arrive. Constantine led his army from Thessaloniki, constantly defeating Lichanes's vanguard troops along the way, until he reached the banks of the Hebrus River. Lichanes lined up his forces on the riverbank, stretching all the way to Hadrianopolis. In some magical historical records, Constantine led 12 horsemen, like a divine army descending from heaven, directly crossed the Hebrus River and completely defeated the 150,000-strong enemy army. This is, of course, impossible. Constantine ordered 5,000 men to find a place unguarded by the enemy, to cross the river, and began to cut down the forest extensively, trying to build a bridge. It is not known whether Lichanes, having lost too many times, became suspicious, or if he was afraid when he saw Constantine associated with a bridge. He ordered the abandonment of the riverbank defense and to fight Constantine squarely on the plain. This was exactly what Constantine wanted. Lichanes's new recruits were no match for Constantine's. They were defeated in just one round. Lichanes's long-built camp also fell under Constantine's sided attack. His army collapsed and fled into the nearby mountains, and were captured one after another in the following period. Lichanes himself once again successfully escaped. He fled in panic all the way until he entered the city of Byzantium to catch his breath. Constantine pursued closely and then surrounded Byzantium, beginning to besiege the city. The city of Byzantium was strongly fortified and guarded the strait. A steady stream of supplies was transported to the city by sea. To change the unfavorable situation, Constantine ordered his battle-hardened eldest son, Crispus, to command the imperial navy, giving him a clear task to open the sea route of the Hellespont and destroy the stubbornly resisting eastern fleet. Crispus, with great courage, directly led his weaker fleet to attack the enemy. The eastern navy was clearly demoralized by the defeat on land. In the first day's battle, the two sides were evenly matched and each withdrew to port. The next day, around noon, a strong south wind suddenly blew, carrying Crispus's ships towards the enemy. He seized the hard -1 opportunity and launched a full -scale attack. With the combination of skill and courage, he achieved an overwhelming victory, destroying 130 of the enemy's warships in one fell swoop. The commander of the Asian fleet, Amandas, after great hardship, managed to escape to the coast of Chalcedon. The sea route of the Hellespont was opened. Transport ships brought ample food and supplies to Constantine's camp, allowing him to continue the siege. He ordered the construction of an artificial mound, the height of which was level with the walls of Byzantium. On top of it, he built tall wooden towers, using catapults to send heavy stones and javelins to harass the defenders, so that they could not rest peacefully. Then, at several points, he set up battering rams to constantly attack the city gates or walls. Lichanes, upon learning of the naval defeat, quickly withdrew the wealth from the city to Chalcedon. He himself had already fled Byzantium beforehand. He conferred the title of Caesar on one of his generals, Martinianus, and ordered him to hold on, believing there would be a way. Lichanes retreated to Bithynia and started recruiting again in Asia Minor, temporarily gathering another army of 50,000 men to make a final struggle. Constantine learned of this situation. He immediately sent small boats to transport his army across the strait, landed on the high ground of Chrysopolis, and challenged Lichanes. Lichanes' army was newly recruited, and their training and equipment were extremely lacking. Although they faced Constantine without fear and were brave and tenacious, they were ultimately crushed under the weight of superior strength. Lichanes once again abandoned his army and retreated to Nicomedia. Lichanes' wife, Constantia, came forward to plead for her husband. Constantine swore before the gods that as long as Martini and us voluntarily went to see the late emperor and Lichanes agreed to abdicate and become a commoner, he would let him live a peaceful and wealthy life for the rest of his days. Lichanes had no choice. He put on the purple robe, bowed his head before his master's feet, and stood up amidst humiliating pity to be allowed to attend the royal banquet. Then he was sent to Thessalonicon under house arrest. But his humble plea for peace did not bring him a good end. Just the following year, Lichanes was accused of conspiracy to participate in a rebellion and treason for secretly communicating with the barbarians, and was executed. It is not known whether, in the last moment of his life, he regretted his execution of Diocletian's wife and daughter. In any case, the era of Lichanes was over, and his death also represented the final end of the era of the Tetrarchy. The Roman Empire was once again under the rule of one emperor. He was Constantine. From his succession to the throne in 306 to the unification of the empire in 324, Constantine had already gone through 18 years. Now he finally reigned supreme. Looking back at 305 AD, Constantine, under Galerius's exclusion, after many twists and turns, escaped from Nicomedia. He passed through Thrace, Pannonia, Italy, Gaul, and Britain, and then spent more than 10 years conquering Italy, Pannonia, and Thrace. Now he returned to Nicomedia. He had completed the great feat of returning to the east. In the days to come, he still had many missions. The cities of the east, the religion of the east of the empire that he dreamed of. Before we begin to discuss Constantine's actions in the unified era, let us first spend a few videos to gain a basic understanding of the development of Christianity, so as to better narrate Constantine's Christian reforms in the Roman Empire.